So our scripture reading this morning is coming from the book of Ruth, chapter 2, verses 5 through 13. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, "To whom does this young woman belong?" The young man who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers." So she came, and she has been on our feet from early this morning until now, without resting even for a moment. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Keep your eyes on the field that is being reaped and follow behind them. I have ordered the young men to not bother you. If you get thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn." Then she fell prostrate with her face on the ground, and she said to him, "Why have I found favor in your sight that you should take notice of me when I am a foreigner?" But Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me. How you have left your father and mother and your native land and come to a people that you did not know before. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." Then she said, "May I continue to find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have come from me and spoken kindly to your servant, even though I am not one of your servants." Throughout our lives, it is guaranteed that we will face uncomfortable situations. Think back to the memories of your childhood, the experiences of trying new things, meeting new people, and placing yourself in new situations. You see, these moments feel uncomfortable because we are creatures of habit, and we thrive in this bubble known as our comfort zone. The invisible line that we draw for ourselves mandates and gives us ourselves a sense of control. We dictate what our lives look like, and we are able to structure a routine that seems familiar, safe, and predictable. It is in our comfort zone that we know exactly who we're going to interact with. Coworkers, friends, and family. And often enough, we spend so much time managing our comfort zone that our days begin to look like carbon copies of each other. I can say for certain that I am 100% guilty of this, and I am so confident in saying this that I believe I can recite off my morning routine like it's the back of my hand. 5:30 a.m., the alarm goes off, and I promptly spend the next 10 minutes convincing myself it's finally time to get up. I hop out of bed, get dressed, leave the apartment at 5:50 for the gym, get there at 5:55, start working out at 6. End the workout at 6:40 and start heading back home. My wife Claire starts getting ready for work at 6:50, and I take the dog out for our morning walk. We circle the neighborhood and get back in time just for Claire to say goodbye at 7:30. I feed the dog, I feed myself, shower, get ready for work, head out by 8:30. It is the exact routine we live day in and day out, and I believe my wife Claire will contest to that. Now, I don't bring all this up to say that our comfort zones are a bad thing, but I do wonder what we are missing out on if we never step outside of our comfort zones. Our scripture this reading comes from the book of Ruth, who I argue can teach you a lot about what it means to step outside of our comfort zones. To provide some context about this book, scholars aren't able to date this text because of its ambiguous nature. But some think that Ruth was written during the time of King David as an attempt to establish David's right to the throne. This text is placed between the book of Judges and 1 Samuel and serves as a kind of interlude, if you will. It disrupts the spiritual relapse found in Judges and 1 Samuel. This relatively short book of the Hebrew Bible describes the journey of two Moabite women, Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi. Experiencing the hardships of being widowed, moving away from their families, and taking a risk by moving to a new nation where they have another estranged family tie. After Naomi loses her husband, Elimelech, and her two sons, Naomi talks to her two daughter-in-laws, Ruth and Orpah, and she tells them that she plans to go back to the land of Judah where she originally came from. Now, Naomi's daughters-in-law had married Moabite women and remained in that land for 10 years, according to Ruth chapter 1, verse 4. According to the customs in the law, Naomi would have found refuge in the house of one of her daughters-in-law. But in Ruth 1:5 we read, "But Mahlon and Chilion also died. So the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband." In that moment we witness a truly difficult situation for Naomi. Without her husband or a male heir in her family, Naomi had lost what scholars believe to be her social anchor in the cultural world, or what we might call as a social safety net in her life. According to the customs and the cultures, Naomi had lost those who we believe may have provided socioeconomic security in her life. So Naomi makes the difficult choice to move back to Bethlehem with Ruth. And when they arrive to this land, the 2 women with no social stability are forced to weigh out their options. The first option is the socially expected one for the time, and the path many widows followed during that time: become beggars in the streets and rely on the kindness of others to survive. Or they could choose to go against the social norms and fend for themselves. Naomi pleads with her daughter-in-law Ruth to leave her behind and go back to her mother's house in Moab, where she might find some refuge. And yet Ruth tells Naomi in Ruth 1:16 and 17, "Do not press me to leave you, or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do thus to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." Built upon her faithfulness for Naomi, Ruth chooses the option some wouldn't expect Ruth to choose. Ruth puts her faith into action and goes against the current of society's expectations for the time. Feminist scholar Euni P. Lee says this about her reading of the book of Ruth. Ruth is a masterful literary composition, meant both to delight and to provide a model of faithfulness. It witnesses not only to divine hesed, which we can see is a Hebrew word meaning covenantal faithfulness, but especially to human acts of hesed that are transgressive. That is, they defy convention and cross cultural boundaries and go beyond the requirements of Torah to ensure the preservation of a family and, by extension, the flourishing of a nation. In doing so, the book commands an inclusive attitude towards outsiders, challenging both personal and communal construction of identity and otherness. Indeed, regardless of how the book is dated, it functions as an important counterpoint to those biblical texts that are not so hospitably disposed to the other. Just before our scripture reading this morning, the text tells us that Naomi has a kinsman on her husband's side of the family. And he is described as a prominent rich man of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. When they settle into this land, Naomi tells Ruth to go to a field to glean for grain behind the reapers. This was a cultural custom in Torah to provide that those who were less fortunate were able to gather grain, grind it into flour, and make bread in order to survive. It just so happens that Ruth landed herself in the field of Boaz. When Boaz notices a new young woman working in his field, he asks his servants, "To whom does this young woman belong?" Boaz is told that she is a Moabite woman, a foreigner, who has come from Moab with Naomi. And this indicates to him that Ruth is distantly tied with his kinship, some second cousin, brother's, mother's, uncle, twice removed type deal out of the family. When he realizes this, he tells her, "Now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. I have ordered the young men to not bother you." Although Ruth holds some kind of distant connection with Boaz's family, his actions here are outside of the cultural norms for the time. Ruth would have been able to glean from any of the fields. That was according to the custom and the law of the Torah that they followed. But Boaz's actions outstretched far beyond the hospitality that is required according to the Torah. He tells her to not only glean from his field, but to stick close to his female servants. He ordered his male servants to not bother her. He told her to drink from the vessels his servants have drawn from the well, and he gave her bundles of grain that she herself did not glean from the field. It is in that moment that Boaz establishes himself as Ruth's protector. Now, I want to pause for a moment and truly contextualize what Ruth has done in the story to this point, because more times than not, we are drawn to focus on Boaz and the compassion and love he pours out for Ruth. But often enough, we neglect to address that all of this has happened because of Ruth's faithfulness and bravery. You see, we are drawn into the story expecting Boaz, the strong, wealthy male figure of the story, to take care of the destitute, young, vulnerable woman. It is expected that we connect these characters with a sense of romance and attraction. And while Boaz's actions were truly kind and went far beyond the expected laws of Torah, I argue he had nothing to lose in this interaction. He was wealthy, he was revered in his community, generally known as a stand-up guy who held substantial social and economic influence in his community. But Ruth, the foreigner from Moab, with no social stock, with a mother-in-law to take care of, bravely stood up against the cultural expectations of her time, stepped outside of her comfort zone, and took action. Take a moment here to think about a time in your life where you stepped outside of your comfort zone. When I think of my own experience, I think about the time in my life that I moved away from my hometown, out of the state, and across the country. I grew up in the town of St. George, Utah. It was in the very southwest corner of the state. And my family arrived there when I was about 2 years old. So my entire childhood is grounded in the context of this city. I still remember the house on the cul-de-sac that I spent my years growing up in, the various schools I attended, the friends I ran around the neighborhood with, the teammates I spent years playing baseball with. Towards the middle of my sophomore year of high school, my parents approached me with a question. They told me my dad had applied for a new job in a different state and that he had received an offer for a job in Lincoln, Nebraska. They told me my dad had applied for this job, but that my dad wouldn't accept the position if I wasn't comfortable leaving the state. Now, when you're a kid and you're presented life-changing decisions like this, you think you would spend a little bit of time reflecting on that choice. And yet, I remember responding to my parents in that moment saying, "Let's do it." Now, I didn't realize in that moment what I had just done and what I had just told my parents. In essence, I looked my parents dead in the face and told them that I was ready to look back at my comfort zone, the town that I had grown up in, and leave it all behind. Without any significant thought in my head, I had just told my parents that I was ready to step outside of my comfort zone and venture into a completely new territory that I did not even know existed. How tempting is this game? This game of what ifs. And I often find myself playing this game quite frequently at times. You see, I believe these two words can drastically alter the course of our lives. We think back to events in our life and we think to ourselves, what if I turned left instead of right? What if I did this instead of that? What if I told my parents no instead of yes? Reflecting back on that time of my life, I can now say that I sympathize with Ruth and Naomi. Settled into the land that you have grown up in, the land you started a life in. Then comes a pivotal moment that uproots you and leads you into a new land, into a new social context. One without the friends and family you were used to seeing. For me, it was an entirely new state, a new city. It was a new high school, it was a new baseball field, it was a new baseball team, new public school requirements, new cultural norms and experiences, and new expectations. As we were moving boxes out of the moving truck, I thought to myself, what is this sensation in the air? And my parents, after growing up in a desert, lovingly told me, this is humidity. This is what it does to you. And it was in that moment that I thought to myself, what the hell did you just do? I was officially far outside of my comfort zone, not recognizing anything, anyone, and having no clue what I was supposed to do. I can't help but think that Ruth also asked herself these same things as she was bent over, picking up stalks of grain off the ground with no rest, following groups of servants who she did not know, deliberately going against the cultural norms of her time, all while being aware that she was viewed in the community as a lowly foreigner, with no social standing, no economic security, no say in the community. Operating completely outside of her comfort zone, Ruth did the one thing that she could control. She remained faithful in the two pillars in her life that we are told into the story. She kept her promise to Naomi, and she kept her promise to God. By stepping outside the bounds of her comfort zone, by challenging the culture around her, Ruth found favor in the eye of a protector. The faithfulness of her actions spoke volume to Boaz, who responded by saying in Ruth 2:11 and 12, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me. How you left your father and mother and your native land, and came to a people that did not know you before. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." Ruth left her comfort zone, braved the unknown, and yet she still found favor of God through the care of Boaz and the blessing of God's reward. Now that I have lived in the Midwest for several years, I really like to play this game of what ifs and reflect on the path that I've taken to this point. What if I told my parents no all those years ago back in Utah? What if I didn't attend the high school I graduated from? What if I didn't meet my wife then girlfriend at that high school in Lincoln, Nebraska? What if I didn't get recruited to play baseball at the collegiate level? And what if that meant that I didn't meet the professors and mentors in college that set me on the path to where I am today? You see, I believe 16-year-old me back in Utah was being nudged along by God to begin this journey. I believe I was being called to break through my comfort zone for a reason, to start my path into ministry, and to go and get my seminary education. And to think these last 7 years, the people I've met, the churches I've been a part of, the new experiences I've had, the favor of experiencing, wouldn't have happened if out of fear or anxiety, I dug myself deeper into my comfort zone rather than challenging it. I wouldn't have met my best friend and my wife, Claire. I wouldn't have been able to learn from the mentors that truly changed my life. I wouldn't have found myself at my ministry setting at Church of the Resurrection, and I wouldn't have found myself at St. Paul's School of Theology. I wouldn't have found a blessing of God's reward or God's refuge if I stuck into my comfort zone and ignored that calling. How might you challenge yourself to take that first step outside of your comfort zone? Do you have a longing to pursue a career, a hobby, or a passion, but haven't because you couldn't reach it from the line that you've drawn in your comfort zone? You see, putting ourselves outside of our comfort zone is difficult for a reason. It requires a discipline and faithfulness to the pillars in our lives, our friends, our families, our dedication to our faith community. It requires dedication to the faithfulness in the ministry of the church. All this isn't to say that we cannot experience God's presence from the walls of our comfort zone. I am by no means stating we cannot faithfully serve God in the ministry of Jesus Christ that is happening right here and right now. On the contrary, I believe we can do all of these things, and we can make ministry a truly wonderful thing by fortifying what we are doing here and now. But have you ever wondered what ministry we're missing out on if we stick to the same old, same old? Have you ever wondered how we as a united people can serve those who aren't able to reach us from the boundaries of our comfort zone? I like to think of the church's call into ministry through the eyes of one of Jesus' disciples that we read throughout the New Testament in the Gospels. Moving from town to town, sharing compassion with all of God's children, doing many different types of ministries, breaking down social barriers, listening to those who feel unheard, and peering into the eyes of those who feel unseen, lifting up the lowliest of people and letting them know that they are truly enough for God, being blissfully aware that we are close to all those who need to hear the good news of Jesus Christ, but those who lie far beyond the bounds of our comfort zone. When I was writing the sermon, one of my favorite scripture passages came up, and that's John 15:16. And in the Gospel of John, it tells us, "You did not choose me, but I chose you. And I appoint you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask him in my name." And y'all, I know we can do that. But perhaps we need to challenge ourselves in the ministry that we're doing here today. Perhaps we need to branch out little by little to make more room in God's garden. By doing this, we may find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant. How might we take that first step out of your comfort zone? How might the church take that first step out of its comfort zone? How might we find inspiration in Ruth and the story of her going against the cultural norms of her time, challenging those who made expectations of her, and putting her faithfulness in the pillars of her life to protect her family and her promise to God? Will we put all of our faithfulness in God and serve all of their children? Or we will continue to build up the walls of our comfort zones and ignore that call? Amen.